and it's my great pleasure to welcome everyone tonight. So on behalf of the Kentucky Medical Association, I'm really glad that you are with us this evening. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dale Toney, and I'm the president of the Kentucky Medical Association this year. Throughout my year as KMA president, my focus has been on the health and well-being of both patients and physicians across the state through an initiative called Be Well, Stay Well, which encourages Kentuckians to take the right steps to improve their health during this time of uncertainty as we navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. You may have seen this work in our successful Raise Your Guard KY campaign, which emphasizes the importance of maintaining well visits with physicians and making sure vaccinations are up to date. I'm looking forward to continuing to support this and other efforts through the Be Well, Stay Well campaign the rest of this year. But tonight, we kick off a very important night, the KMA Advocacy and Action Month. Advocacy and Action Month will replace our traditional Physicians' Day at the Capitol, the in-person KMA advocacy event held in Frankfurt each year. We're doing this out of concern for the health and safety of Kentucky physicians during the COVID-19 pandemic. So instead, throughout the entire month of February, KMA physicians are being asked to engage their legislators virtually and through other activities in order to promote the association's priority items. There will be a number of ways members can participate, and you will hear more about that during tonight's meeting. Before we begin, let me share a few housekeeping items that we are for tonight. We are using the Zoom webinar platform, which means that your microphone and camera are disabled. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, we encourage you to use the chat function or the Q&A button on your Zoom controls. We want our time together to be interactive, and I encourage you to participate using these tools. We have a lot of information to cover, so I'll go ahead and introduce Corey Meadows. He's the Deputy Executive Vice President of the KMA and the Director of Advocacy for the KMA. He's been at the KMA for 9 years, and he won an award in 2016 from the Kentucky Academy of Eye Physicians and Surgeons President's Award for his advocacy. He is the most well-respected and nicest and best political strategist that the KMA has to offer. Mike Kudik and I both work at UK, and I bet you Mike's online. I haven't seen him, but I bet he is. But for the last 2 years, we've been trying to get our Dean DePaulo, to pay for some UK memberships. And as one of our enticements to this, I gave him 2 of Corey's weekly LQAC, the Legislative Quick Action Committee updates, and the dean and his chief of staff was very, very impressed. So this year, just in fact 2 weeks ago, the chief of staff forwarded it to somebody who forwarded it to somebody, and then suddenly I was contacted by the UK lobbyist and who wanted to know what Corey thought about particular bills and what agenda Corey had for the legislative session. So my last comment will be for the baby boomers and the Gen X's. And so the millennials may not understand this, but there was an old advertisement that said, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And so when Corey Meadows talks, people listen. So Corey, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Toney. I really and truly appreciate your kind remarks. That's was unexpected, and I do appreciate that. But as our KMA staff knows, we have to have good leaders, and you certainly fit that bill. And we appreciate the time that you spend being our president for this upcoming year. You're doing a great job, and we certainly appreciate your time and effort and look forward to the second half of your tenure. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We have what we hope is some very useful information for you to use as you engage your legislators over the coming month. This program, obviously, more ideally, we love our Physicians' Day at the Capitol and doing it in person. We always like seeing our members walk those halls with their white coats, but clearly out of safety for you, your patients, the members of the General Assembly. we're going to go this route this year, and we think it can be even more effective than even our in-person. And that's what our hope is. And we really appreciate your interest in doing this. The other reason is because the LRC and much of the Capitol grounds are still currently closed to the open public. There's a lot of stuff being done by appointment only, but certainly no advocacy days by any stakeholder group. And so this was our attempt to replace our in-person day with something that is effective and hopefully will generate even more participation from our members across the state. Before we get into our program tonight, I thought it might be helpful, especially for those of you who are new to advocacy, is just to have a little bit of an overview of KMA's advocacy program. As you may or may not know, KMA has established policy, and our policy is set by our KMA House of Delegates. And if any of you have participated in that process, you know that our House of Delegates is our policy-making body, and each year, with the exception of last year due to COVID, they pass resolutions each year that fills our policy manual. And so that gives our advocacy team some guidance and direction on positions to take on healthcare related issues. But it doesn't stop there. Oftentimes our KMA Board of Trustees, we will seek guidance and direction from them, as well as the KMA Executive Committee. But then there's two other entities that are particularly important to our advocacy efforts, and that's our Commission on Legislative and Political Advocacy. It's roughly about 25 physicians who serve in that capacity, and they get regular updates from our advocacy team, many of which you will hear from tonight, throughout the year. They also help with the resolution process as well. So they play a critical role in our advocacy, both legislative and political advocacy efforts. But the group that probably works more often than most is our Legislative Quick Action Committee. It is a small group of physicians, our KMA officers and our chair of the commission and our vice chair of the commission. They meet regularly throughout the year, mostly during the legislative session. In fact, they meet each week during the legislative session, and they also help give guidance and direction on new issues that may pop up that our House of Delegates hasn't dealt with. So they provide a absolute critical role to our advocacy efforts, and Dr. Tony, as president, serves on that committee, and they do a fantastic job for our advocacy team. And so that's just a little bit of the structure of our advocacy program, especially for those, again, that are new to maybe new to KMA or new to advocacy. A lot of not only staff working on this, but a lot of your colleagues, physicians, who not only take care of patients during the day, but they spend a lot of time, effort, and resources helping the KMA with its advocacy efforts. And so at the right time, we hope some of you will be interested potentially in serving in some of those capacities. I'll transition now to this year's session. We're in, obviously, 2021, odd number year, and that means the General Assembly is meeting for what they call their short session. Our General Assembly actually meets every year. It used to not be that way. Only within the last 2 or 3 decades did they actually go to annual meetings. They used to meet only every other year, but now they meet every single year. But each year, every other year is a little bit different. In the even numbered years, they meet for their long session or the 60-day legislative session. And in the odd years, again, they're meeting for their short session, which is only 30 legislative days. Normally in a short session, the beginning of it is rather, for lack of a better term, boring, in that they meet for a week and they come in and they elect their respective leadership of the House and the Senate. They will assign committee chairs. There'll be some bill introductions, but that's largely it. It's more organizational in nature. And then after 1 week, during the short session, they recess. They gavel out and go home, back to their districts, back to their day jobs for about a month. And then they reconvene for part 2 in February. That's a normal short session year. This is no normal year. Due to COVID, due to some scheduling changes in the legislative schedule, this session looks and feels a whole lot different. And we're going to get into, John Cooper and Brandy Cantor are going to be getting into that in just a moment. But before I turn it over to them, what I really wanted to impress upon those attending is that advocacy, even during a pandemic, advocacy is more important now than ever. When we have boots on the ground, so to speak, and we have physicians going to Frankfurt, that can be very effective. When we're doing advocacy from a distance, that really requires our full membership to be engaged on the issues and participate as early and often as they can. And so that's why we're really excited about our Advocacy in Action a month and impressing upon our membership that they're needed now more than ever. And so with that as background and with that in mind, I want to turn it over to John Cooper and Brandy Cantor. John Cooper is with Capital Link Consultants. I think he mentioned before we came on that he is very close to representing KMA now for nearly 34 years, a lot of years. John has devoted to KMA, and his experience and dedication is certainly appreciated. Brandy Cantor is with MMLK Government Solutions, and they've been representing us now for the last 5 years or so. And with Brandy and her team and John and his team, KMA is represented very, very well in Frankfurt. Brandy works tirelessly on our issues and is dedicated and as passionate about the issues as many of our members are, and that's nice to see in your outside lobbyist. And with those two and Amber Laughlin, who you see on the screen, that is our boots on the ground. That's our advocacy team. And so it's a pleasure having them on tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to John and Brandy to give us a little bit of a recap of this unusual short session and how it began, and then also kind of give us a preview of what we might expect in part two. John, Brandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight. As Corey said, this is an odd numbered year, so we have technically a 30-day session, which is supposed to be a short session, really of cleaning up things that you haven't done in the big budget session in even numbered years. But we're actually doing in this session, we're actually doing half the budget, or 1 year of the biennial budget. Kentucky has a 2-year biennial budget, and because of COVID, they only did 1 year. They're coming back this year to do the other year of the biennial budget. So what normally happens is, as Corey said, we come in, this year we came in on the 5th of January, and we would go home that Friday, and they would reorganize, and then they would come back the 1st of February. In fact, they come back tomorrow, the 2nd of February. But they actually used up 8 days on the front end. They went all 4 of the days that they normally go. They went Saturday, then they went 3 days of the next week. And they had some priority items they were trying to get out, and also to get an early start on the budget. And they'll be back tomorrow. We have 22 legislative days when they come back. And that doesn't sound like much, and it's not. The last day for new bills in the House and the Senate are next Wednesday and Thursday. And even though the session technically will go on till March the 30th, a good bit of that time they're not in session. They either have work days, or they will be in concurrence days, or they have a 10-day veto recess. But we are due, and we are due to be done March the 30th, and they have to be done constitutionally right now by the end of March. What I'm going to do right now is turn it over and let Brandy talk about what they did in the first 8 days, and then I'm going to take it from there, kind of take it home, and talk about what we're going to see when they come back until the end.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Corey, for your kind words, and thank you all for letting us be here with you tonight. And I would be remiss if I didn't make note that while Corey says I work tirelessly on your all's efforts, there's actually a team behind me that does that as well, that helps me out. It makes us all successful together. We firmly believe that working together as a team is how you're successful. So I know Corey works closely with those folks as well, as so does John. So I just wanted to make that clear that I'm not a one-woman show, and we've got a team of 9 people actually on the ground just from our firm, plus John's firm helping work on KMA activities. So as Corey said, we have a lot of boots on the ground and a lot of ears to the ground on your issues. So as John mentioned, they came in the first 8 days, and typically what they do is they organize. So they came in and they did their leadership elections. both in the House and the Senate. Every 2 years, they elect their 5 members of leadership. In the Senate this year, there were no changes in leadership, so we'll see the same folks heading up that chamber as we have in the past. However, in the House, we did actually see a shift. We have a change in the floor leader in the House due to a spot that was left open by Representative Bam Carney, who unfortunately has been ill over the past year and unable to be with us in the General Assembly. But that did leave a spot open, and so we have a new floor leader in the House who is Representative Stephen Rudy. Because of that change, it also changed some chairmanships, and this was all part of the organizational session those first few days, where they appointed a new chair of the A&R committee, which is a seat formerly held by Representative Rudy, and Representative Petrie is now heading up that committee. And since Representative Petrie formerly headed up the Judiciary Committee, Representative Massey has taken over that spot. So those are the major changes that occurred within leadership. And I tell you that because those are folks that we feel like you should really take some time to get to know if they are your representatives or your senators. Those are the folks we'll be asking you to call upon during this advocacy month. The other thing they did is each chamber had 5 bills of priority legislation that they wanted to pass in those first 9 days, as John mentioned. Most of those were targeted at curbing some of the governor's executive powers. There has been a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you guys have seen it in media reports, about some frustration of feeling left out on some decisions that were made by the governor with regard to shutting down businesses, shutting down schools, things like that. So ultimately, each chamber ended up passing 3 bills. Most were directed at that issue, and also at revamping the regulations. Right now, the executive branch can do things by emergency regulation, and there have been some parameters put into those guidelines that give some guardrails around what the governor can actually do. Those bills were passed, they were sent to the governor's office, and the governor did veto them. So what happens now is they go back to the General Assembly, where they will have the opportunity, once they come back into session tomorrow, to override the governor's vetoes. And once that's done, those bills will become law. So things moved pretty quickly. The first 9 days, there was this break. And now we're ready to jump in next, or starting tomorrow, on phase 2, which will, we're hearing, generally in the short session, they don't want to pass as many bills as they do during a long session, but often that's not the case. Once we get into session, we start seeing things flying. So it's really good to have all these folks watching it and keeping eyes on what they are doing up there. So John, did I miss anything on that first part?
You got the first part of it. I'll take it from there. And we're going to give you an overview. One of the things that is, as Brandy said, the governor vetoed both Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1 and some other bills that limit his power. There's been a struggle all over the United States between governors and legislatures during this pandemic. Over half the legislatures in the country don't meet all the time. And so there are times when they're not in their state capital. Kentucky actually is one of the state legislatures in the country that meets the fewest number of days. And so they're not in, and they weren't in during most of this pandemic. And obviously everybody wants to be relevant. And there were things that the General Assembly felt like they were left out of in terms of the parameters of the executive orders. So they passed some bills to curb the governor's powers. He vetoed those bills. They will override those tomorrow, probably. We think most of those bills will actually get overridden tomorrow, and then they will be off to the courts. Those will eventually end up in the Kentucky Supreme Court. And I'm not sure how that's going to go. I think it may be a split decision. I think that the Supreme Court may actually side with the governor on a number of his executive action authorities. On some, they may not. But in any event, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's plenty of politics when you talk about vetoes and overrides, and and headed off to the courts. The other thing, the big issue they've got, and the only real issue they've got that they're constitutionally bound to do, is to pass the budget. And they have to pass the second year of the biennial budget. The budget is in better shape than they anticipated it would be. One, because of CARES Act money in 2 rounds and a 3rd round upcoming. And the other because Kentucky did have enough foresight to pass the Internet Marketplace sales tax bill, which we're able to collect sales tax on all the internet sales. Well, you know what happened during the pandemic? Everybody ordered everything. You know, there were at least in my neighborhood 3 to 4 Amazon, FedEx, UPS trucks a day, and sometimes a lot more. So there was a good amount of revenue that came into Kentucky because we took advantage of collecting all of the internet marketplace sales tax, which is a big driver of our revenue in the state. In addition to that, things you know, the taxes that are the lowest in terms of revenue are like gasoline taxes, because people just didn't travel as much. So the road fund, which is funded by the gas tax, is down. But anyway, they will pass all of that budget by the end of the session. In fact, they've already been working on it. I expect, and the budget is the legislature's document. While the governor presents the initial budget, he does in the regular session, the 60-day session, and he did in this one, which we're, as I said, because of the pandemic, we're dealing with the second year of the biennium. It really becomes the legislature's document after that, and they will pass a bill. And the governor can actually, the governor can veto the whole budget, which some governors have, but the governor in Kentucky has the ability to line item veto the budget, which means he can take specific things out of the budget. They will pass the budget in time to be able to override those vetoes. So you can rest assured they will pass the budget out where there's at least 10 days left in the session, because the governor has to either sign a bill, veto a bill, or let it become law within 10 days. So I talked about that 10-day veto break. That's what all that's about. They'll come back and deal with any vetoes of the budget and anything else during the last 2 days of the session. So in addition to that, there's a bill, because Kentucky has historical racing, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, only to say that the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that historical racing, which are really slot machines at racetracks, if you've ever looked at one of the operations, that they're unconstitutional. And the General Assembly next week this week on Thursday will introduce a bill in the Senate, and it will start its track through to try to correct that problem and create what a lot of tracks have put millions and millions of dollars into in the historical racing. In addition to that, there is a bill, a couple of bills on racial injustice. I think the no-knock warrants are going to get some attention during this session. Senate President Robert Stivers is going to introduce that. There's a Voting Rights Act bill that I think that will get some play. And in addition to that, we could have some more COVID-related bills. It's 22 days. Be a lot of bills introduced, and a lot won't get through. But I can tell you that your advocacy is going to be critical. When we have to do our lobbying by Zoom type platform and by conference call, we need your help now more than ever. So that's a general sense of what's happening, what's going to happen in the session as they come back to town. It'll be some long days and nights, and it's difficult, but it's also difficult for them to talk to each other, them being the legislature. Corey, with that, I'll turn it back over to you to proceed with the rest of the program.
Thanks, John and Brandy. And I want to point out something, very important about John and Brandy's comments. You may be wondering, John covered some non-healthcare related issues, and you may be thinking, that's nice, but what does that have to do with us and our advocacy? And here's the point: is that, as Brandy mentioned, we're in a short session, and they've sent the word out that their bandwidth is not as wide as what it usually is. And so when you have the type of issues that Brandy and John mentioned, that will take up a lot of the conversation, the discussion, and the debate for the 22 days that they have left. So that means that the more of those issues they talk about, the fewer of other issues that they talk about. We want to make sure that healthcare and healthcare policy has its seat at the table. So those things that they mentioned are very important, if maybe not in content or substance to the KMA, certainly is procedurally, because they will be taking up a lot of the room that we hope that many more of our issues would. So again, that's why in the advocacy, this session is so important, because the more of our members who contact their legislators and highlight the importance of our issues, the greater the chance that they will be addressed. And with that as the background, this would be a nice segue into talking to you about the KMA priorities and some other notable pieces of legislation. First and certainly foremost, you know, our COVID or liability protections for declared emergencies. I don't have to tell the group attending tonight a lot of the risks that have been taken, the sacrifices that have been made during this pandemic in treating patients. And given that we've been in a time of which many of us have never experienced before, there's been a lot of uncertainty about how to provide care, what care to provide. Businesses have faced the same thing on their front about whether they should remain open, how they remain open. And lurking behind all of those decisions that are being made is liability exposure. Certainly physicians know all too well about liability exposure through even outside of pandemic timeframes and normal medical malpractice type cases. But certainly during a pandemic, the risk of liability exposure goes up exponentially. And so, like many states around the country, Kentucky is looking at legislation that would provide liability protections for what they are calling essential service providers. And that has come in the form of Senate Bill 5. It's been sponsored by Senate President Robert Stivers. And KMA has made this one of its top priorities. Senate Bill 5 would actually provide liability protections for essential service providers, including physicians and hospitals, by ensuring that such entities will receive immunity when complying in good faith with the various and ever-changing standards that have been placed out there for you to follow. Both environmental guidelines and premises liability type for your doctor's offices and for hospitals, but also treatment guidelines as well. And that would apply, as the bill is currently written, to this declared emergency or any future declared emergency. And so we're hopeful that that bill will pass to give you immunity for the care that you have provided, as long as that care was delivered in good faith and that there was no gross negligence and intentional conduct or wanton or malicious type behavior. It has to be performed in good faith. And it also has to be directly related to the declared emergency. And it was written that way more narrowly to avoid any constitutional concerns that we have with our current state constitution, which, as we know, is very favorable to the plaintiff's bar. And so we took that into consideration and worked with a wide range of stakeholder groups to draft this narrowly enough to withstand constitutional scrutiny, but yet still provide you and your colleagues and hospitals and other essential service businesses the protections they need during a declared emergency. Now, there's been some talk about, you know, some pushback on the bill applying to any future declared emergency. And so there's been some conversation about this legislation being dialed back to only pertain to this current pandemic that we're in. And those conversations will go on, and we'll be ready to stand firm on the way it's currently drafted. But as that process goes on, we'll be there to weigh in as necessary. But just know that there is legislation that we are making a priority to protect healthcare providers, physicians, hospitals, et cetera, during this very difficult time with ever-changing standards of care. Because as you know, many of them change seemingly daily or weekly and monthly. And it's tough to provide care in that environment. But you stepped up, and in doing so, you deserve that protection. Also, a top priority for KMA during this session is telehealth expansion. And that is House Bill 140. House Bill 140 really recognizes the importance that telehealth has had during this pandemic and the benefits it could have even when we're outside of the pandemic. And so This bill has been filed by Representative Deanna Frazier from Richmond, and one of the primary co-sponsors is a good friend to KMA, Representative Kim Mosier. And what it looks to do is to retain some of the expanded COVID-19 telehealth policies, such as access to audio-only services, coverage for additional E&M services, removal of the face-to-face restriction on a number of behavioral health services, and continued payment parity for all diagnoses, not just those related to COVID-19. And we know that the state relaxed many of those rules. We know the federal government relaxed many of those rules. It has worked so well, we're saying we need to relax those rules permanently, and that's what this bill is intended to do. This bill is actually one of the very few bills that got referred to committee before the legislature left town, and it has been referred to the House Health and Family Services Committee, which is chaired by the primary co-sponsor, Representative Mosier. So we feel pretty confident that this bill will at least get a hearing in committee and hopefully through both chambers of the General Assembly. House Bill 50 is also another bill that we're focused on, and it concerns mental health parity. And it is designed to recognize the change that was made in federal law actually several years ago now, saying that mental health services should be on par and no different than physical health services. And so that's why Representative Kim Mosier filed House Bill 50. And this legislation would require insurers to demonstrate compliance with federal law and how they design and apply managed care techniques for mental health and addiction treatment to ensure that the coverage is no more restrictive than what it is for any other medical condition. So basically, and specifically, they would have to file reports with the Department of Insurance, with the state, showing that they are in compliance with the federal law. And if they're not, our hope is that the DOI, with our encouragement and other stakeholders' encouragement, will look at those shortcomings and press insurers on making sure that they are in full compliance with the federal law. It's a simple bill, but one that's very important in ensuring compliance and something that is very, very needed, and as we've seen, especially during this pandemic. Also, along those same lines, there's been a couple of bills filed in both the House and the Senate. We call those companion bills, House Bill 102 and Senate Bill 51. These bills were sponsored. The House bill was sponsored by Representative Mosier. You're probably noticing a recurring theme here, very instrumental in healthcare policy in Frankfort. Senate Bill 51 was introduced by Senator and Dr. Ralph Alvarado, and those pertain to prior authorization for medication-assisted treatment or therapies. These bills seek to, quite simply, remove prior authorization requirements for FDA-approved medications that are used to treat both alcohol and opioid use disorders. This would apply to both commercial health plans as well as Medicaid MCOs. The legislation would also require commercial insurers and MCOs to file annual reports to the state showing the number and the type of providers that prescribe medication for addiction treatment to its insured in conjunction with behavioral therapy, and those that are prescribing those medications that are not in conjunction with behavioral therapy. And so it also, so in other words, it will be gathering data, if you will, on the use of these medications, as well as who's prescribing them and how many of them are being used for those very important wraparound services in the behavioral therapy space. Senator Alvarado and Representative Mosier felt very strongly about that data to see how those things are working. And so a very important bill. There's also been a lot of conversation, as you've probably seen in media, concerning vaccinations. There's always, if you advocate long enough, and for those of you who've been doing this for many years, you know this to be the case, you advocate long enough, there's always an issue that pops up during a legislative session that maybe you didn't foresee coming or you didn't know whether it would come. And there's always one, maybe two, that really rise to the top of the conversation in Frankfort. Vaccinations is that issue for this session. There have been a number of bills filed dealing with vaccinations, and giving the discussion surrounding the COVID vaccination, it certainly has become a hot topic, as evidenced by those many bills that have been introduced early in this session. Senate Bill 8 being a Senate priority, and you can always tell a Senate or House priority by the bill number that it has. If you see a Senate bill number 1 through 10 or a House bill number 1 through 10, rest assured that is a priority for that respective chamber. And given that Senate Bill 8's number is within 1 to 10, it is certainly a Senate priority and has generated the most attention out of all the vaccination bills. Senate Bill 8 would provide exemptions from mandatory immunization both during and outside of a pandemic for any child, emancipated minor, or adult who personally or by a parent or guardian submits a written sworn statement objecting to the immunization based on conscientiously held beliefs. As you probably know, in Kentucky, there are already a couple exemptions on the books, those that are related to medical reasons, which is understandable, but also is related to religious grounds. This would actually add the concept of conscientiously held beliefs to that list of exceptions. If passed, this provision would supplement that current state law that allows for those current exemptions. KMA policy is very clear on this issue. This was adopted in 2019 when we saw this issue really rising to the top around the country. And it states that the association supports the immunization recommendations of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices for all individuals without medical contraindications. And two, our policy says that we support legislation eliminating non-medical exemptions. Therefore, KMA, no surprise, must oppose or will oppose any legislation that creates exemptions from immunizations that are not based on medical contraindications. And so many of you have already weighed in on this. We've been sending out legislative alerts, asking you to contact your House and Senate members, and we've noticed a real uptick in the emails that have been sent to our legislators advocating on this issue. And we encourage you to keep doing that as this is a very important issue. And notice that the legislation is not specific to the COVID vaccination. The bill is drafted much broader than that to apply to any vaccination. And so that obviously offers a lot of concern, and we appreciate those of you who have weighed in and appreciate in advance of those who will weigh in on that issue going forward. So those are some bills that we are looking at and already working very hard on. You'll hear other issues throughout the session related to APR in prescriptive authority for controlled substances, which for many, many years we have opposed vehemently in removing the Kappa CS and physician collaboration from APR in prescribing. That, once again, is an issue that's before the General Assembly, and so we ask you to once again engage on that issue. You will hear more conversation about marijuana and its use for medicinal purposes. KMA policy is opposed to that. And you're likely to hear some more healthcare related issues as well, related to colon cancer, diabetes, and a whole host of issues. Just know that we track all of those bills, that just because you haven't heard us talk about a specific bill tonight, that does not mean we're not working on it. There are well over 100, probably closer to 200 healthcare related bills filed each and every session. We monitor each one of those and appreciate your advocacy on the ones that you care about. And so with that, we want you to engage on those issues and to help us explain how you can be involved in this Advocacy and Action Month on those and related issues. I'm going to turn it over to Amber Laughlin, who will walk us through some of the resources and tools that we're providing for you. Amber?
Thanks, Corey. As previously mentioned, Advocacy and Action Month is replacing the in-person Physicians Day at the Capitol event this year. So we're asking members to engage their legislators in a number of issues in a number of different ways this year throughout the month of February. We encourage you to take a few minutes each Tuesday of the month to reach out to your legislators as part of our Talk Tuesdays initiative. The idea behind Talk Tuesdays is to have a designated day of the week to remind you to set aside some time for advocacy. However, if you're especially busy on Tuesdays and that does not work for you, just pick another day. The important thing is that you are engaging your legislators on KMA's priority issues. So you just heard Corey mention some of the priorities for this session, and there are several resources available on the Advocacy in Action page of the KMA website. You can access that site by going to KMA's website at kyma.org, or you can click on the Advocacy drop-down menu. It is the first link, or you can go directly there, kyma.org/AIA month, all lowercase, into your browser. If you scroll down to the resources section, you will find the list of 2021 KMA legislative priorities. This is a one-page document that contains a brief description on each of the priorities for the session. There's also a tips for effective advocacy sheet that provides some tips on things to do, as well as some mistakes to avoid when talking to your legislator. There's also a section at the bottom of that sheet on some helpful tips on virtual meeting etiquette. Next, you will find the issue papers for the telehealth bill, House Bill 140, and the liability protections bill, Senate Bill 5. As Corey mentioned, these are two of KMA's main priorities, and these papers are designed to provide some background on these issues, as well as some talking points you can use when discussing these bills with your legislators. On the Follow the Issues button, if you want some more information about a particular bill, or you want to check the status of a certain bill, you can click on Follow the Issues, and this will take you to the Legislative Research Commission's website, where you can look up House and Senate bills by number or by title and sponsor. So for example, if you wanted to find out more about Senate Bill 5, you can go to Senate Bills, click on 5, and there you'll see the last action that was taken on the bill. You can read the full text of the bill. And if there are any amendments that are proposed to this bill, they will be listed down below. And the process is exactly the same for looking up House bills. So once you have familiarized yourself with the issues and you are ready to take action, if you do not know who your legislators are or how to contact them, you can use the Find Your Legislator feature, which will take you to the KMA Action Center. So on the right-hand side under Find Officials, if you enter your zip code, it will ask you for your street address. And then once you enter your street address, it will return a list of all your federal and state elected officials. So to view your legislator's contact information, you can click on their name. It will come up with that information, including their Capitol Office phone number, in case you would like to call and schedule a time to talk with them by phone, or even see if they're interested in scheduling a video conference with you. Be sure to ask which is most convenient for your legislator. Some of them may be more comfortable with video conferencing than others. You can also email your legislator directly from this KMA Action Center by simply checking the box next to their picture and then compose message. From there, you just enter the subject and the body of your email along with your contact information and click send. Another way that you can effectively advocate is by responding to a call to action received in a KMA legislative alert, email, or text message. Bills will start to move very quickly during the last days of the session, and the status and sometimes even the content of the legislation can change suddenly. So please watch for these alerts so you can stay up to date on any changes that may affect your advocacy efforts. So after you have been in contact with your legislator, either by phone, by video conference, or email, please take a moment to let us know about it by completing this legislative contact response form. It's located at the bottom of the Advocacy in Action webpage. This is a really simple web-based form. It should just take you a couple of minutes to complete, but it is incredibly helpful to the advocacy team to hear about your discussion with your legislators. So finally, I just want to briefly go over how you can become a KMA advocacy champion. At the end of the month, KMA will recognize members who have completed the following actions. The first is to contribute to KPAC. Political advocacy is another way you can participate in KMA's advocacy efforts. Consider donating to KPAC on KPAC Action Day that's scheduled for February the 18th, or you can contribute anytime by clicking the link on this page or by visiting kpac.org. If you have a Twitter account, make sure you're following KMA and then retweet KMA's advocacy messages weekly. Be sure to use our hashtags, hashtag Advocacy in Action and hashtag KMA Talk Tuesdays. Also sign up for legislative text alerts. This is the best way to stay informed You can click the link to send an email, or you can sign up right now by texting KMA to 50457. Also, communicate with your House or Senate member or a member of a key legislative committee each week. This can be on Talk Tuesdays or another day that works for you. It can be by phone, email, video conference, or by responding to a KMA call to action in a legislative alert. Write a thank you note to your House or Senate member. This is important, especially if your legislator took the time to meet with you. Please do not forget to thank them, and although this is a virtual advocacy month, a handwritten thank you note is always a nice touch. And finally, once again, please complete the advocacy response form each week to let us know about the contact you've had with your legislators. This again is very helpful, and we would like to hear about any feedback that you've received. So I appreciate your time this evening, and I hope you will all become KMA advocacy champions. And now I'll turn it back over to Corey.
Thank you, Amber. And as you can see, we have dedicated an entire web page, a microsite, if you will, to our Advocacy in Action Month. And we hope everyone takes advantage of those resources in their advocacy efforts. And we know that we're throwing a lot of information at you tonight. And so I do want to offer to each one of you that if you have questions, that's why we're here. We're certainly available. I'm available. Amber is available. And we can certainly help you navigate these waters, especially if you're new to the advocacy world. And so a lot of information out there, but a lot of good resources, and we hope everyone finds them beneficial. It looks like we have a few minutes left, and so this would be a nice time probably for some of the questions that I see are coming in. And so we have time for a few of those. And to start off with, I think there was a question about potentially resolutions, and resolutions specifically related to if you wanted to do a resolution on maybe the efforts of the governor, Dr. Stack. Resolution process, as I mentioned earlier in the call, is done at the House of Delegates. And so we are anticipating, hopefully, that we will have be taking resolutions this year. And that would be a good time to submit your resolutions for the House of Delegates to consider. There was also a question about the vaccination bill, Senate Bill 8, and there was a question that there's some information out there that the bill might ultimately be changed to improve the bill from the medical provider standpoint, from the physician perspective. There is some conversation about the concerns that not only does the medical community have, but also the concerns that businesses have. This is not just a healthcare related issue. There are a number of industries who are very concerned about the breadth of Senate Bill 8 and adding potential new exemptions to the vaccination statutes. And so, yes, there has been some conversation about changing the language to make it better, but that remains to be seen. That bill, it looks like, is scheduled to be heard this week in committee. If it's going to be changed, we will know at the beginning of that hearing whether there is a substitute or an amendment to that bill. And certainly we're going to be reviewing that language to see if it takes care of some of the concerns that we have. And so we'll be keeping you updated. That's something very important to point out about Advocacy in Action Month. Is a bill that we tell you about tonight, or a bill that you read about in the media, and how it's drafted now may look drastically different at the end of this month. And so it's very important that you get our legislative alerts, because we will be updating you on these priorities and how they have changed, either for the better or for the worse. And so that information will help guide you as you continually reach out to your legislator regarding these issues. And so we're hopeful that the advocacy that you've done already and that we continue to do will improve that bill. It just remains to be seen what changes are being made, and we'll keep you updated through our normal communication vehicles. I think there was a question about the governor's impeachment, and that is an issue that has come up. In fact, there's not just a petition that has been filed by members of the public against the governor, but actually there's been 2 additional impeachment petitions filed. It's interesting. We don't deal with these very often, but there's been one filed against the Attorney General. There's also been one filed against a member of the legislature. And the question was, do we weigh in on those? No, we do not. And largely, the General Assembly is required to meet on those petitions. They have to impanel a committee to address it for the citizens who filed that. And unless John or Brandy disagrees, I don't suspect that any of those petitions will get very far at all. So I don't think that the General Assembly, especially when they come back into session, will be spending really an ounce of their energy on those. John, Brandy?
Those are a matter of process. They're not going to impeach the governor. They won't impeach the Attorney General. I doubt if they even impeach the representative. But the truth of the matter is, yeah, those are required under the Constitution to have a process. But I can tell you they won't return impeachment against the governor.
Right. Yeah, it's largely for show. Also a question about, I think the question related to Senate Bill 5 and whether it would protect bad actors, if you will. I'll summarize the question by individuals who maybe are not enforcing the standards, CDC standards or state public health standards, and whether that would shield them from some liability from acting in that fashion. The short answer is no. The bill attempts to take care of that by saying that anyone claiming the immunity must show that they acted in good faith and provided a service related to the declared emergency. And acting in good faith is the key there, is that they can't act grossly negligent or intentional or maliciously or wanton behavior. And what that means is if you are openly violating standards that have been put out there either by the state or federal government, I think there's clearly a good case that can be made that you have acted with gross negligence, et cetera. So no, the bill is not intended to protect, as they say in the legal world, bad actors. And so that certainly was not the intent of the legislators, and we would not support anything along those lines. So hopefully that gives some reassurance. There's also some questions about talking points on some of our bills that we're supporting. Yes, the resource page that Amber described contains many of those resources. As she mentioned, our 2 main priorities, they're all priorities, but 2 that we started out with at the beginning of the session that have the greatest chance of success, the liability protection as well as the telehealth. They have more in-depth talking points. It's more of an issue paper, and that gives you some greater detail as you're advocating on those. And that was by design because we feel like, again, with the limited bandwidth that the legislature has, that we want to make sure that we at least get those 2 things put out front first and foremost. There is other resources on there that provide brief descriptions of some of the other issues we've talked about tonight and others. So we encourage you to check those out. And if you still have questions about what our position is, what you should talk to your legislator about, again, please contact us at KMA. We're happy to supplement with any information that you need. Just looking here for any additional questions before we start to wrap up. I believe that covers a lot of the questions that I see. Oh, there's one here asking about marijuana. I did mention that it will come back up this year, has come back up. There have been a bill filed in both the House and the Senate on that issue. And the question centers around our position on that. And our position is very clear. We are opposed, as I mentioned earlier, to that effort. We go on to state that we are very much open to further testing. And so if relaxation of marijuana as a Schedule I drug is necessary, our policy says that is okay and that we would support that to find out whether or not this plant with all these different chemicals, and you all would know the science better than I do, but we know that there's a lot in the marijuana plant, and have it tested to see if there is true benefit or medical efficacy that can be delivered safely. And if through those normal testing procedures, it's determined that there is, then maybe there's a path forward. As we've seen in other drugs, there's actually other drugs out there that have some marijuana components in them that have been FDA approved, and the KMA's policy supports that type of avenue. But to merely state that a plant is ready and available for consumption and be termed a medicine is outside the realm of evidence-based science that the association is comfortable with. And this position is largely consistent as well with the AMA and its position. So hopefully that gives you a little clarity on where the KMA stands on medical marijuana. The prospects of it passing this session remains to be seen. You never say never. And it did pass the House last year. But given, again, all the things that they still have left to do in this session and the limited bandwidth that they have, it remains to be seen if that will rise to the top. It could. And so the jury's still out, but we will monitor that as we always do and keep you updated through our communication vehicles. So with that, it looks like we're nearing the end of our time. Again, I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Tony, for representing us tonight and leading the association, as well as Amber, Brandy, and John for their presentations. But most of all, I want to thank each and every one of you who attended. This shows that you are already engaged, and we hope this has been helpful to you. We thank you in advance for your advocacy. And again, always reach out to KMA staff if we can be of help in any way whatsoever. And so with that, I will bid everyone a good night and hope to see each and every one of you very soon.